Hopeful that everyone can hear me throughout the room. I was told to eat the microphone so that everyone can hear me. Welcome to the inaugural meeting for Indivisible Naperville for 2020. We're happy to see everybody here, particularly a lot of new faces, and welcome. If you would like to join us in future such meetings, we'd love to have you. I've got three things that I want to introduce quickly. The first of which, my name is Beth Went. I'm one of the founding members of Indivisible Naperville. Generally, Diane McGuire, who is one of our primary founders, does this job, but her mother just passed away and she is with her family and unable to be here. So we send her our love and our respects. And secondly, as a group that has been principally founded by women and their supporters that are men, I can't begin the meeting without acknowledging what happened in Virginia today and the Equal Rights Amendment. Long overdue, and I'd like to give a big shout out and round of applause for that. Lastly, as I continue my welcome to you all, we have some ground rules. As we all know, the topic that we're talking about tonight has some passion around it, and such. We are the host of the meeting and will reserve the right to cut off any commentary or if things get a bit long or heated as they occasionally might. So we ask that we all work on this together and enjoy our topic for the evening. With this, I'll turn everything over to Nancy Turner, another one of the Indivisible Naperville committee members.
Thanks, Bev. Okay, I'm just going to, before we get started, continue with a little bit of business. And first, I'm going to start with an update on our postcard projects. We have various postcard projects going on that we started in December. One to Naperville women voters to encourage them to vote in the primary on March 17th, and one to Republican senators about H.R. 8. That's the House resolution for universal background checks, and it's also one of our questions tonight for our panelists. We are going to continue our postcard outreach to 250 Naperville women voters at our February meeting. And then on January 28th, we're having a postcard party at Braconi's at 6:30 p.m. We have 1,000 postcards going out to Wisconsin voters. So please look for this on Facebook, on our Indivisible Naperville Facebook page, and consider donating a $7 sheet of postcard stamps. This Saturday is the march to the Women's March, and the theme is March to the Polls. There's one march in Geneva at noon, and there's another in Chicago at 11 a.m. And when I turn the mic over to Bev George, she can give you more information on the groups from Naperville that are going down to the march on the train. Our February 19th meeting is Let's Talk Cannabis, Naperville. There'll be more to come on that with the March referendum. Asking Naperville voters to approve or not dispensaries in Naperville. Okay, now, since we are a volunteer grassroots group, we don't have dues, but we do have expenses. For instance, there is a monthly charge to rent this room. So the way thank you.
Generally, my wife does this, who's Irish, and will tell you a long, short story about why we would love you to contribute. Last time she threw in $20 to get things rocking and rolling. So you all know grassroots organizations are what make this country move. So anything that you can contribute, we would appreciate tremendously. And I'll start right here. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you. Okay, now we do have a few candidates in attendance tonight, and we're going to ask them to briefly stand up, state their name and the position that they're running for. And we're going to start with Kevin Coyne, current city councilman, who is running for the DuPage County Board.
Sure. Do you want the mic? I'll be very quick. I'll try and speak loud. Hi everybody, Kevin Coyne. I'm a second term Naperville City Councilman, currently running for the DuPage County Board. Public safety's been a big part of my platform and will be as I pursue my candidacy to county board. Talking about a lot about gun violence and crime, some of the criminal incidents that have happened in our area of late. Look forward to tonight's discussion and hearing from our chief as I do every Sunday week. Good, thanks.
Thank you. Next we have Rachel Ventura. She's a candidate for U.S. Congress.
I'll just be,
And I think we have a
I
representative.
put representative because I've never been here, so I'll just be brief. Rachel Ventura is a progressive Democrat running for Congress in the 11th. Naperville has 3 congressional districts. She's challenging Belle Foster in the Democratic primary. I'll be here if you want to talk to me after the forum, and I might be sharing my views personally during this meeting that are not hers, but I'll differentiate.
Okay, thank you. And then finally, we have Mary Jo Mullen, who is also running for DuPage County Board and is also currently an elected official in DuPage County.
I will come up so not everyone has to turn around in their seats. Thank you, Nancy. Again, my name is Mary Jo Mullen. I'm running for DuPage County Board in District 5. I am an engineer by background. I've played in stormwater and floodplains my entire career, and I currently own my own business. I am running to improve the quality of life for all residents. I plan to use my experience as an engineer with our infrastructure and our stormwater and our resilience to flooding and other natural disasters, along with my work as Lattle Township Supervisor, the first Democrat ever to be elected to that office. And I oversee our social services, mental health services, and I started a suicide prevention coalition there. So I want to bring all of that together to really focus on quality of life for all residents. Thanks.
Thank you. And now I have one more business item, and that concerns the index cards. If you posed a question to one of our panelists, we'd appreciate it if you would pass the index cards to the ends of the rows, and then we will incorporate them into our moderated discussion. And now I'm going to turn this over to Bev George, another member of Indivisible Naperville, and also Ace, who is going to be our moderator.
I'm going to make a quick announcement, and then I'm going to pass this to Kate Ruffing, because Kate's going to do the introduction.
Thank you.
That's all right. Real quickly, Nancy mentioned about the Women's March in Chicago Saturday. ACE is planning to go. We have about 10 people going who signed up, and you're welcome to join us. We're going to take the train. I think it's 9:25. Leaving the station, we'll arrive Union Station around, I think, 10:13, which gives us plenty of time to walk over to Grant Park. We're going to pause for a little bit at the South Lion, the Art Institute. So as you face it from the street, it's the one on the right. And I'll have an ACE sign, and if you are from Naperville and want to join with us, please do so. And then we'll head over by 11 to Grant Park to join the rally, followed by a march at noon. Kate?
Okay, thank you for listening to all of our business items, and now we'll begin the program, and I'm going to introduce everyone. Our first panelist that we're going to be talking to is Benjamin Ferdinand. He's a federally licensed firearm manufacturer and dealer based in Libertyville. He has a Bachelor of Science degree in Environmental Science from Northwestern University and is also a graduate of Northwestern School of Police Staff and Command. He served in law enforcement for 29 years with the Fairfax County Police Department and the U.S. Secret Service at the White House and the U.S. Federal Air Marshal Service in Chicago. And he was the Assistant Federal Security Director for Law Enforcement at O'Hare Airport. Since 2017, he has been the owner and operator of Benjamin Specialties in Libertyville. His customers are local collectors, hunters, target shooters, police officers, and local law enforcement agencies. Our second panelist is Robert Marshall. He currently serves as Naperville's Chief of Police. He was appointed to the top position in 2012, having served in law enforcement for 27 years prior to being named Chief. Before being named Chief, he served as Naperville's Assistant City Manager for 7 years. As Chief of Police in Naperville, he is responsible for overseeing the entire department and all its employees, both civilian and sworn. Naperville enjoyed its lowest violent crime rate in many years under the Chief in 2018. Chief Marshall has a BA in Criminal Justice from Western Illinois University and an MS in Public Administration Management from DePaul. Our third panelist, Leslie Ruffing, has been a volunteer with the Naperville chapter of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America since 2017 and and she has become its group leader in 2019. Moms Demand Action works to keep our families safe from gun violence. They are a nonpartisan organization with chapters in every state. Some members are gun owners and others are not. Moms Demand Action is not anti-gun. They are anti-gun violence, an advocate for common sense gun policies and responsible gun storage. Leslie resides in Naperville with her husband and 2 young children.
All right, so we're going to start our questions, and we were talking earlier, so we're going to address one question to the panelists, Ben Ferdinand first, followed by a question to Chief Marshal, and then a question to Leslie, and we'll do it in that order, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That way we get different inputs and different opinions coming from different venues and thinking. All right, so I'm going to start with the first question to Benjamin Ferdinand. And again, thank you all for being here tonight. What steps must someone take in order to purchase a gun in Illinois?
Thank you very much. First, thank you everybody for coming tonight. This is a very important topic for all of us and for everybody's safety and for everybody's rights. So thank you for taking the time out of your busy week to be here this evening. A little bit about myself. I am, as mentioned earlier, a retired law enforcement officer of 29 years experience. I now own a home-based firearms business. So I see folks in my home. So my business practices vary a little bit from what you might expect in a retail shop. We can talk about those details a little bit later. But overall, the federal and local and state rules still apply to me, even though I run the business out of my home. So in Illinois, there are basically 2 ways you can buy a firearm, either from a private individual or from someone like myself or from a gun shop that's licensed as a federal firearms licensee by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. So if you want to purchase a firearm from an individual in Illinois who is not a licensee, you have to have an Illinois firearm owner identification card. Is everybody familiar with that? So you apply to the state police, you fill out an application, takes some time to process, they run a background check on you, and they issue you a card that's good for 10 years? 10 years now. How many of you know that they run a background check on you every day of the year when you have a FOID card, except for the 5 federal holidays? So when you have a FOID card, you're getting a background check every single day through the state police database system. So in order to buy a firearm from a private individual in Illinois, you have to be able to present your FOID card to the seller. The seller has to log on to a state police portal where they enter your FOID card information to verify that it's still valid. And then the seller has to abide by Illinois' waiting period of 72 hours for all firearm transactions before you can take possession of that firearm. When you do take possession of the firearm, you'll receive a bill of sale, which you're required to hold on to for 10 years. So that's how you do it with a private individual in Illinois. From a dealer, there are a number of ways you can acquire a firearm from out of state or from in-state. But let's just say you're going to a gun shop, you're going to buy a firearm that they already have in stock. You discuss your purchase with the salesman, display your FOID card before you're allowed to handle a firearm, and then when you decide to make the purchase, you'll fill out this form here, which is a firearms transaction record, which is an ATF form. I actually brought a number of copies. If you guys want to pass one around, pass a few of them around to take a look. So when you're presented with this form, you fill out Section A, which is your identifying information, full name, address, place of birth, all your various descriptors. Then there's a series of questions you have to answer. Are you the actual transferee? Meaning, are you the actual buyer, or are you going to buy the gun for someone else? If you're intending to buy the gun for somebody else, in order to avoid that person having to do the paperwork and background check, that's called a straw purchase, and that's illegal. All right, so the seller needs you to certify that you're the one that's going to be receiving the firearm, and you're the one that's actually going to be the owner of the firearm. Then there's a series of disqualifying questions. For example, are you under indictment or information for a felony? Have you been convicted of a felony? Are you a fugitive from justice? Are you an unlawful user or addicted to marijuana? Which is probably another question we can talk about later, because that's going through some scrutiny now with the change in Illinois laws. Have you ever been adjudicated mentally defective or been committed to a mental institution? Have you been discharged from the armed forces under dishonorable conditions? Are you subject to court order restraining you from harassing, stalking, etc.? You have been convicted of domestic violence. You ever renounced your U.S. citizenship? Are you an alien illegally in the United States? If you answer no to any of these questions, the seller is not permitted to sell you the gun. And what other situations could arise where the seller can't sell you a gun?
Don't you, as the gun seller, also have the option of making the decision that you don't feel this person should?
Absolutely. That's exactly right. So one of my responsibilities as a responsible gun owner is that if somebody's sitting across from me and I'm not getting a good feeling about that person, and maybe they're from an urban area, they're trying to buy 10 of the same type of low-cost firearm, maybe there's something wrong. Maybe that's a straw purchase. So it's my obligation to make that judgment call to not sell that person firearms. I am under no obligation to sell anyone a gun if I have any feeling that there's something wrong with the transaction. We'll get through this. Any questions so far? So, then you're going to sign and date the form certifying under penalty of perjury that your answers are correct. And then the waiting period starts, 72 hours from the time you agree to purchase the gun. In the meantime, the seller is going to log into a state police portal to run your background check. And one of three things could happen. It can either come back approved right away, or it could come back delayed, in which means either the state police system is backed up and kind of caught in the cyber world, or that there's information that they have to search by hand because your name is similar to somebody that has a conviction or something along those lines. Or it could come back denied, in which case there is something in your past that denies you from being able to legally own a firearm in Illinois. So after the 72 hours has passed and the background check has been completed and you've been approved, then you can return to the seller to pick up your firearm. Any questions about that process?
I would like to, just for time's sake, we're going to have to kind of let him speak. There are enough people in the room that if we ask a lot of questions with each of their questions, we'll be here too long, that the room allows.
Okay.
So I think his presentation was great. We'll move on to the next question.
So the second question goes to Chief Marshal, and it is, what is your greatest concern with regard to gun ownership in Naperville?
First of all, I'd like to welcome everybody here. I think this is a very important topic that we as a community need to talk about. Fortunately, in Naperville, we have one of the lowest crime rates among cities in our demographic area in the country. We're very proud of that, but it's not without gun violence and crimes involving firearms. We use best practices to make sure that we have up-to-date policies and procedures. Naperville is the only city in Illinois that is part of a benchmark city group, which we study policies, including policies related to firearms with other jurisdictions, just like Naperville, throughout the country. We also are an accredited police agency, meaning that we meet a series of standards that are nationally accredited by the Commission on Law Enforcement Accreditation, and we just went through our 9th reaccreditation process. So that ensures that our policies and procedures meet national standards. So we're proud of that, and like I said earlier, gun violence is very important to our community, and it's our mission to deliver extraordinary service while also protecting life and property. So the first question that I have is my greatest concern, or our department's greatest concern with gun ownership is essentially I have two areas that we as a department are concerned with. One is the safe storage of firearms, and specifically juvenile access to firearms. For example, since January 1st of 2016, we had 141 gun-related incidents, and 33 of these reports involved juveniles. That means 18 and under. Those individuals had access to firearms, and they put themselves at risk. Additionally, the unsecured firearms. Last year we had 3 auto burglaries. Residents that parked their vehicles in their driveway and left them unlocked with their firearms unsecured. Those firearms are now in the hands of criminals. So again, safe storage of firearms is a critical issue that we're working on in the Naperville Police Department. and we're looking at some legislation, both within the city ordinance as well as in the state, to mandate that firearms must be secured from individuals under the age of 18. Number two, the other concern we have is individuals who've had their firearms owner's identification card revoked. And these revocations are for serious criminal felonies as well as mental health issues. The best estimate that I have from the state police who manage the FOID program is that we have at least 200 residents in Naperville that are unlawfully in possession of firearms because they've had their firearms owner's identification card revoked for, again, serious offenses such as mental health, alcohol abuse, and we do respond to incidents from the state police that tell us if there's a clear and present danger. We do take proactive action. For example, in the last 2 years, we had one incident where an individual that we were aware of had a mental health issue, and we were aware that his firearm owner's card was revoked, and he had as many as 20 firearms within his residence. So our special response team went to that residence and retrieved those firearms from an individual who lawfully could not possess those firearms. There is an amendment that is presently being worked on by Representative Kathleen Willis, and there's 10 key points to strengthen the firearm owner identification law, and that is presently being worked on in the House.
Thank you. This next question is for Leslie Ruffing. Leslie, in your opinion, and that of Moms Demand Action, your organization, is preventive comprehensive treatment of mental health, mental illness, the answer to gun violence? What about the sharing of mental health records with law enforcement?
Thank you, and thanks so much for Indivisible for inviting us to participate on this panel. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to an open and respectful conversation on a very important topic. So, is comprehensive treatment of mental illness the answer? No, it is not the answer. Do we need mental health reform in this country? Absolutely. Oftentimes we see after mass shootings especially, the conversation immediately goes to, well, mental health. Honestly, all that does is just further stigmatize mental illness in this country. And the statistics show less than 1% of annual gun homicides are perpetrated by those with mental illness, and only 3 to 5% of violent crimes are perpetrated by someone with a mental illness. So the fact of the matter is those with mental illness are actually more likely to be victims or to inflict harm upon themselves. So that's what studies have shown us. We have to stop scapegoating mental illness as the only reason why gun violence happens. What we do know about mass shooters is 97% are male. I mean, that is something that we do know. The majority are white. More than half have a history of domestic violence. So these are the things that we can focus on rather than, constantly just blaming mental illness. And do we need to share mental health records? Definitely. We believe that all 50 states should have reporting laws so that, like Chief Marshall was saying, when they shouldn't, someone who should not legally own a gun does not have it in their possession.
Thank you. Back to Benjamin Ferdinand. With regard to gun ownership, do you think the ban on semi-automatic weapons should be reinstated? And if not, why do you support the legal purchase of semi-automatic weapons by citizens?
Thank you. I do not support a ban on semi-automatic weapons, and I'll be happy to explain my position why. But first, let's talk about a couple of definitions first in the question, because I think it's important for all of us to have a framework and some definitions to go by before we go any further. What does semi-automatic mean? It is not a machine gun. It is not necessarily a military weapon. It is not something that is on the fringes of the gun culture. What semi-automatic means is that when you pull the trigger of a firearm, one bullet is fired. That's it. In order to fire another bullet, you have to release the trigger, get your sights back on target, pull the trigger again. All right. The same thing is true for a revolver that is not semi-automatic. Instead uses the mechanical action of the trigger pull to load the next round. With a revolver, pull the trigger one time, one bullet. Release the trigger, sights back on target, press the trigger again, one bullet. So semi-automatic only means you get one bullet every time you pull the trigger. The difference between a semi-automatic and something like a revolver or a lever action gun, the semi-automatic uses the energy from the expanded gases of the fired bullet to work the action to reload the gun. Okay? So just like a revolver, just like many other types of guns, one trigger pull means one bullet. Okay? Now that's different than what is fully automatic. Fully automatic means a machine gun. You pull the trigger, the gun keeps firing until it either runs out of ammunition or until you release the trigger. And fully automatic firearms have essentially been banned from further manufacture and importation since 1986. All right. So semi-automatic, one trigger press, one bullet. That's it. It is not a military fully automatic firearm. So why do I support the use of semi-automatic firearms? That's what modern firearms are. Almost all modern firearms are semi-automatic in one respect or another. Glock pistols, your old pocket 25 caliber auto, your AR-15, your semi-automatic BAR hunting rifle, your H&K SL7 hunting rifle. All sorts of sporting rifles, hunting rifles, self-defense rifles are semi-automatic. Why is that the case? Because they're efficient, they're easy to use. In the case of firearms like the AR-15, they're modular, they're lightweight, they're accurate. That's why people own semi-automatic rifles. They feature a number of accessories and features that are banned under some communities, assault weapons ban, because of strictly ergonomic features of the firearm, such as Cook County assault weapons ban. Bans things like folding and telescoping stocks. Now you'd think, what makes that a feature of an assault weapon? All that allows you to do is to adjust the stock to make the gun more comfortable to shoot. That's it, or more compact to store somewhere. It doesn't change the way the gun functions. It doesn't change its lethality. It doesn't change how powerful it is or how fast it can shoot. It's a feature that is banned. Why? Because it makes the gun more comfortable to shoot? That doesn't make any sense. So some of the other features of most assault weapons ban include things like that, like heat shields over the barrel that keep you from burning your hands on a barrel. Why does that make the gun more dangerous? I don't know. Or a muzzle brake that helps control recoil. Why does that make the gun more dangerous? Or because you hold the gun like this with a pistol grip instead of like this, like a regular rifle. Why does that make a gun more dangerous? It doesn't. All it does is it makes it look like a military fully automatic rifle, which it is not. So why do people need even semi-automatic rifles in the first place? Like I said, hunting, target shooting. It's the modern version of your SUV. All right, just like an SUV is used for many purposes by many families for many different things, whether it's hauling kids around, hauling groceries, hauling dirt from Home Depot and mulch. An AR-15 and guns like it can be used for similar purposes. They're modular in design. The user can customize it for whatever he needs it for, he or she needs it for. Hunting, target shooting, self-defense. You can change barrel length. You can change caliber. You can even change the color of the gun if you don't like the color. That's why they're so popular. There are 15 million semi-automatic rifles out there. 15 million. Yet according to the FBI in 2018, less than 2% of all firearm murders in the United States were committed with a rifle of any type. That's including guns that are not semi-automatic. So semi-automatic guns are a smaller subset of that. So what problem are we trying to solve here, folks? There's 15 million of them out there.
Question then, because I don't know about guns, but is it the large magazine that gets people to be able to rapid shoot?
Okay, thank you for that question. That is something worth discussing. For those of you that couldn't hear, she asked about magazine capacity. How does that function into it? Do larger magazines hold more bullets? Yes, they do. How quickly can you change a magazine in a modern firearm? Maybe a second, second and a half. It can be done so quickly that the magazine capacity restrictions, I believe, are meaningless. In fact, the larger the magazine, due to engineering constraints, the larger the magazine, the less reliable it is. You see like those big drum magazines, like in one of the recent mass shootings that holds 100 rounds, those fail notoriously. They're heavy. They're hard to maneuver.
They jam.
They jam all the time. They're not reliable. That's why the military doesn't use them. So I'd rather have a criminal with a drum magazine than with a bunch of 10-round magazines, because the drum magazine is much more likely to fail, and when it does, he's not going to be able to reload. So that's sort of the technical end of it. I think the magazine capacity restrictions are meaningless. It's a feel-good measure, but from a shooter standpoint, from a law enforcement standpoint, it's not going to solve anything. On the flip side, magazine capacity could be important for home defense. Something goes bump in the night, I get up, I grab my pistol. I don't know what you wear to bed, but I don't have anywhere to put an extra magazine. So I only got what's in the gun. And if there's more than one intruder, do I want only 10 rounds? No. I want as many as I can carry reliably to be able to defend my life and the life of my family.
Okay, again, I think we're going to move on to the next. Thank you.
All right, the next one's for Chief Marshal. Illinois was the last state to allow for concealed carry. Is concealed carry a concern for law enforcement? Why or why not? Some research suggests fewer individuals are interested in a career in law enforcement since concealed carry has been enacted. Have you seen a decline in applicants for the police department in Naperville?
With regard to the conceal and carry license, I checked with my staff, and we have experienced 0 incidents of concern with people with concealed and carry. The positive about that is that there are requirements with conceal and carry. There's a qualification that's mandated, as well as, just as important as there's training. So our experience, and I've checked with my staff, and based on our data that we've reviewed, we've seen no incidents. Most of the time, individuals that we come in contact with, they advise us, whether it's a traffic stop or a meeting I was just at on Monday where an individual came up to me and said, "Chief, I just wanted you to know that I have a concealed and carry license and I'm armed." I said, "Oh, thank you for telling me." So in terms of Naperville, we've seen no incidents of concern. As far as impact of hiring, Naperville, the city of Naperville and our police department is a destination place for individuals to come and be hired by the Naperville Police Department. Our last test, we had 300 people show up at our orientation, 200 picked up applications. None of them experienced a concern about conceal and carry has impacted their ability to apply for the police department. Again, we're going to give a test this August. Our focus is on diversity and hiring people to best represent the population we serve. So that is our focus. We've heard 0 concern about concealed and carry impacting our ability to recruit police officers for Naperville.
Leslie, how important is the passage of House Resolution 8, which is universal background checks, in the Senate? How will it reduce gun violence?
Thanks. So it's very important. Universal background checks is the backbone of any comprehensive gun violence strategy. What it does is it closes dangerous loopholes and it keeps guns out of people who should not have guns, clear and simple. We're not trying to disallow people who are, following the laws and who are lawfully allowed to own a firearm. Universal background checks are not trying to stop that. What we're trying to do is simply keep guns out of the hands of individuals who should not have a gun. States, obviously there's been states around the country who have enacted stronger laws requiring background checks, and a 2019 study showed that those, those states have lower homicide rates. States that prohibit violent misdemeanor offenders from possessing firearms have lower rates of homicides and intimate partner homicides. you know, the loopholes in our background check system, it weakens the gun possession laws and it enables criminals to be armed. And that's what we're trying to avoid, and that's why passing universal background checks is so important.
Can you explain one of the loopholes?
So, well, sure, I'd be happy to. So right now, the universal background checks only cover sales like with the gentleman sitting down next to me with gun purchases.
That's incorrect.
Just let me finish, right? Okay. So at gun owners, if you purchase a gun, you could go online and purchase a gun with no background check. So that means.
It's incorrect.
How is that? Then how is that incorrect?
I would rather you.
Yeah.
Without getting into politics, I'll just discuss the technical aspect of how an online firearm purchase works. Maybe you might have heard of the website gunbroker.com, a number of other auction sites and firearm sales sites where you can purchase firearms online. And what you're required to do is, once you win the auction or you purchase a firearm online, pay for it, and then you have to arrange with a local federal firearms licensee, a gun shop, to accept delivery of that firearm for you. And once that firearm arrives, and you do all the same paperwork we talked about before, do the full 4473 form to get the full background check, waiting period is enforced, and then you can take possession of the gun. It is illegal for somebody to take possession of a gun across state lines, with a few exceptions. Illinois law allows you to buy a long gun from a state that adjoins Illinois, but that seller in the other state has to comply with all of Illinois' requirements for both waiting period and background check before they deliver the gun to you. So
I just got to say,
background check is required for all purchases online.
I have to say something about criminal mentality. I mean, I grew up in a family of Eastern Europeans. Some of my family were in Russian businesses, so-called Russian businesses. And I can tell you, criminals are not going to abide by your laws. My family, some of my family who live in Chicago don't abide by this.
Commentary, and again, I'm being mindful of everybody's time for the evening, so if you haven't asked your question yet, let Leslie finish, and then we're going to move on.
I would just say something really
questions, that was what the
I agree. You're absolutely right. We all know that there are ways around it, okay? I mean, not everybody that buys a firearm goes through the proper internet websites. We know that there's websites out there that you can buy a firearm, and we all know that there's ways around it. We've all seen it. So it's those purchases that we are worried about, that we don't want hands. All we're really simply trying to do, I would love it if we could all just agree that we don't want guns in the hands of dangerous people. And that's all we're trying to do with universal background checks.
Right, the next one is for Ben. So here we go. How is a federally licensed gun dealer different from a private seller?
Thank you. Well, I think we touched on this a little bit earlier when we talked about the process to purchase a firearm, either from a private individual or from a licensed dealer. So as a licensed dealer, I'm regulated by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Now, as of January 1st, also the Illinois State Police, after the passage of Illinois' Federal Firearms Dealer License Certification Act, which imposes all sorts of duplicative and expensive costs for me, but that's a topic for another time. As a federal firearms licensee, I'm subject to inspection from law enforcement and from ATF at any time. They can show up at my door, knock on the door, and demand to see all firearms that I have in my inventory and all of my records. They're allowed one unannounced inspection per year, and they can make an announced inspection anytime they want. So I have to be very careful in my record keeping. I have to be very careful in the decisions I make. I have to be very careful in the way I store and secure my firearms. In fact, I just had an inspection about 2 months ago. And even though I'm a very small shop, ATF was at my house for 3 days, going through every single piece of paper that I completed in the last year. So I'm still here, so it went well. In terms of other differences, in Illinois, everybody gets a background check, whether you're buying it from a private individual and logging into the state police FOID card website, or whether you're buying from a dealer that's going through the state police website to the FBI record check. So no matter who you buy from legally, you're getting a background check already in Illinois.
Thank you.
Yes.
How You said you just had an ATF inspection. How often, since you've been in business, have you had an inspection? And announced?
The question was, how often have I had inspections since I've been in business? I've only been in business a little bit over 2 years. That was my first one. I have had other regular contact with ATF from an investigative standpoint. They're looking into somebody that I transferred a gun to. I've also contacted them in reference to suspected fraud cases that I've come across as a dealer. So I have a very good line of communication with the local ATF office and inspectors that I've worked with on a number of cases. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Chief Marshal, are there laws either proposed or in place that you feel would or do work to make us safer from gun violence?
There's a lot of laws out there, and we have the UUW law that's in place right now that governs how people can use and possess.
Chief, could you talk a little bit closer to the microphone?
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent.
Okay.
Up here, it's hard back here.
Is this
so
better?
I was wondering about the other folks.
Is this better? Can you
Yes,
hear
it
me?
is.
Okay.
Thank you.
So yeah, there's the unlawful use of a firearm law. Legislation has been in place for many, many years that govern how people can possess and use firearms as well as other weapons. I mentioned a couple earlier, the child access prevention law that I'm actually working on with Senator Ellman to try to get that through the state legislation. Safe storage of firearms, we talked about that, as well as the FOID legislation and being more assertive and aggressive of going after people who have revoked FOID cards to get their firearms out of the hands of people who just should not have firearms. So those are some of the laws that are in place that we continue to work on. The revision to the FOID process also includes something that we're very interested in law enforcement, and that is giving police more authority to seize firearms from individuals who have revoked FOID cards. So that's something that, you know, I have a councilman in the front row here that this year we went to the council and asked for additional police officers to form a strategic patrol team to be more assertive, to go after the people that we know live in Naperville that have received letters from the state police as well as our department telling them that their FOID card is revoked. So please turn in your firearm. Guess how many come to the police department to turn in their firearm? 0. So we need to be more assertive in law enforcement and following up on that, and that's what some of the legislation in the FOID law is supposed to address. But we can address that ourselves through Naperville, and we plan to do that this year and be more assertive rather than just sending out letters. And there's some strategies we have in place to make that happen. The other thing that, besides the laws, the key for us in law enforcement is repeat firearm offenders. And I'd like to read some data that we received just recently about recidivism. Firearms offenders, repeat offenders are at a higher rate than non-firearms offenders. Over 2/3, that's 68% of firearm offenders were rearrested for a new crime during the 8-year follow-up period compared to less than half of non-firearm offenders, which was only 46%. So repeat offenders need to get a clear message that if you commit a crime with a firearm, you're going to be held accountable. And we're not going to just let you out. And again, the chances of them committing a similar crime or a same crime with a firearm are astronomically high. So that message needs to be, be delivered. And we in the police department, we continue to catch the same people over and over again. We don't complain about it, we just do it. But a lot of the individuals we arrest for armed robbery, crimes of violence, I look at their criminal histories, and it's sometimes it's as long as my arm. I don't understand how these individuals continue to get released from prison. And recently there was an executive order out of the governor's office that was going to release the prison population by 25% by the year 2025. That's 40, and that came from the Department of Corrections. That's 48,000 prisoners that are incarcerated right now, some for very violent crimes, and that the goal is to reduce that population to around 42 or 43,000 people. And we in law enforcement have to deal with people on probation or parole that have committed violent offenses. So we need to have We have the laws on the books. Let's just use them and get our courts involved and our judges to keep these individuals in prison. And if you're going to let them out, what about the Department of Corrections? What's their responsibility to rehabilitate people instead of sending them out on the street and they end up getting in trouble again? There's a responsibility on this state government as well as the Department of Corrections to rehabilitate individuals who commit violent crimes with firearms.
What about the guy in New York who didn't use a gun 5 times? He robbed a bank. He got to come out. And he went back out and he robbed again. Just a note, right?
Yeah, and
So
I know
that's
we're not here to talk about
right,
pedophiles, but I can talk to you about sex offenders
It's a
too.
political
that
situation,
continue
not
to get released.
you're there to enforce it. It's the political part.
Leslie, in 1993, research funded by the Centers for Disease Control found an association between gun ownership and murders in the home. In 1996, the Dickey Amendment was passed, which barred government-backed research for gun control. Recently, the government passed spending bill included $25 million to investigate gun violence as a public health crisis. What direction do you think this new research will take, and how will this research help reduce gun violence?
Thanks. So we definitely need to treat gun violence as a public health crisis in America. Guns are now the second leading cause of death for teens and children in this country after motor vehicle accidents. Simply put, the more facts and data we can have on this topic, the better we'll be able to confront it. For 60 years, the U.S. Department of Transportation invested significantly in highway and vehicle safety records, even though, despite opposition from the auto industry. These types of things were putting in guardrails and barriers, laws requiring seatbelts, criminalizing unsafe driving. And what these did is they reduced the fatality rate of motor vehicle accidents by 81% from 1956 to 2017. So what we can see is data helps us understand, recognize the issue, recognize the ways that we can combat this issue to make the public, safer, honestly.
Ben, the next one's for you. What type of personal history will disqualify someone from gun ownership? I think you touched on that earlier, but as a follow-up, is there any liability for you if a gun sold from your store is used in the commission of crime?
Thank you. I'll explain a little bit about the process of how it is determined who sold the gun that was found on a crime scene. Records are kept by manufacturers, by distributors, by dealers, by retail shops, where they got the gun from and who they sold it to. They're called acquisition and disposition records. For dealers, yes. Those acquisition disposition records are required to be kept for 20 years by dealers and indefinitely by manufacturers. So what happens when a gun turns up at a crime scene is it's recorded who the manufacturer is, what the serial number is, and what model number is. They go back to the manufacturer, and they initiate what's called a trace request. And step by step, ATF can follow that gun from the manufacturer to the distributor, to the dealer, to the first point of retail sale. So, and who that gun was sold to. That's how the trace process works. I've never had a trace request, but if I was to get one because a gun of mine turned up somewhere where it shouldn't, or even if it was just lost, I would have 24 hours to respond to ATF with that information. So it's a fairly robust system. Where it can break down is person-to-person sales that aren't recorded. People lose their records. So Illinois already has on the books a law requiring record keeping for all person-to-person sales. So with regard to my liability, if I sell a gun to somebody that's used in a crime, this is America, you can sue anybody for anything. Hopefully I don't find out. I practice ethical business practices. I follow my gut. If something doesn't feel right, I don't sell the gun. So can I be sued? Sure, anybody can be sued. I'm not aware of any specific statute that would enhance or defend me from any lawsuit.
Chief, this one's for you. Constitutional carry, the ability to carry a firearm openly and without permits or training, is favored by some gun rights advocates. Do you support constitutional carry? Why or why not?
Well, this is something I've researched a little bit, and I know it's pending in Illinois. There's been some talk about constitutional carry in Illinois. I think before I could, formally take a position in public, I'd have to do some research with the states that have constitutional carry. What are the requirements? What has their experience been with constitutional carry in those states? And we have the opportunity to do that next month when I'm at a Benchmark City conference, because there's many states that we're part of, and we have this Benchmark City relationship with, that we'll be discussing that in March. And I plan to learn a little bit more about it and the impact. What are the individuals in the other states, how's that working? Whether or not I could take a position on it, I'll know more as I continue to research it.
Leslie, how do you try to balance your advocacy for the right to live a safe life, free from gun violence, with those who advocate for the right to bear arms as a constitutional right?
So as I said earlier, I would just love to think that we could all agree that we want to decrease gun violence in this country. Like, I would love to think that we could all agree to that, right? And Moms Demand Action, we are not anti-gun, we are anti-gun violence. We have gun owners, we have Republicans, we have Democrats, we have everybody, and we welcome everybody. There's responsible gun ownership, and then there's gun violence. And I think we have to remember that the two can both exist at the same time. And all we're trying to do is advocate for things like safe storage laws, keeping, guns out of the hands of criminals. Because my safety and the safety, and most importantly, of my children, quite frankly, is the most important thing to me.
Ben Ferdinand, what sort of storage devices do gun dealers sell? What's the price range? What technology is available now or in the pipeline for preventing unauthorized persons from accessing a firearm? Are biometric trigger locks available, and are they effective?
Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways we can answer this question. So storage devices, they go from anywhere from your $2 cheapo trigger lock to a $10,000 custom vault. So it's really a matter of what the owner feels is best for his particular situation to secure the firearm from unauthorized access, yet have it available should he need it in a personal defense situation. Technology that's available. So different locking devices and storage devices, you could have a key, you could have an electronic combination, you could have a mechanical combination. There are some biometric devices out there. In fact, in my last house, my vault was secured with biometric technology, but it didn't work very well. If your hands are dirty, if you're wearing gloves, if you don't put your finger on the pad in just the right way, you can't get in there. I was locked out of my vault for about 12 hours. I don't know why, the batteries were fresh, but it just didn't work. For me as a gun owner, I rely on a firearm for personal defense, and I would certainly not want that device to fail if I need it in a life-threatening situation. So at this time, I don't think the technology is there for biometric gun locks. There are also RFID rings that you can wear that will unlock a pistol box. But again, if you don't have the ring on your hand, if you just got out of the shower, there are all sorts of things that go wrong. And if you lose the ring and it's found by a juvenile, then he's got access to your firearm. So you have to look at your personal situation and decide what is best for where you live and where you secure your guns and who has access to that space. And far be it from me to tell you what's best in your home. But I can certainly offer you any product that is available. A little business pitch. But I do encourage everyone to take advantage of the technologies that are out there And when I sell people a gun, especially first-time gun owners, I always remind them, I said, don't spend all your money on the gun. You gotta save money for ammunition, for proper training, and for proper safe storage. It's absolutely vital.
Aren't you required to give a lock
Yes.
for every gun?
Thank you. For all handgun sales, I'm required to provide a trigger lock. So as well as this notice from the ATF, Youth Handgun Safety Act notice. I have to give this pamphlet to everybody that buys a handgun in my business. So I can pass some of these around for you as well if you're interested in taking a look at what that pamphlet says.
Chief, of the 40,000 Americans who died by gun violence in 2017, 60% of those were by suicide. Is suicide by firearms prevalent in Naperville?
Well, I'll answer that question with the data. So we have 10 years of history that I got from our crime analyst, and in 10 years, Naperville has experienced 95 suicides. It's 95 suicides in the last 10 years. Of those 95 suicides, 21 were by firearm. So that's an average of about 20% of our suicides were by firearm, 2.1 firearm suicides per year. So that's when you compare that nationally, that's a relatively low rate in terms of suicides by firearm here in Naperville. I would like to highlight some of our robust preventative programs with regard to suicide. We have a suicide hotline. One of our social workers came up with a crisis text line that individuals who are thinking of suicide could text and get immediate help. Again, we're averaging probably between 10 and 12 suicides per year in the city of Naperville. With regard to gun safety programs, we implemented several years ago a gun take-back program where residents who do want to get rid of firearms, they can do it safely by dropping them off at the Naperville Police Department. And we work with a company called Gun Busters, who will take those guns, make an electronic file of the gun, and then destroy it, and then resell, and then use the scrap metal for recycling purposes. That way, we're assured that when an individual turns in a gun to the police department, it is not resold, it is not going into the hands of a third world country or a criminal that may be in the United States. So it's a very safe way to dispose of your firearm. We've offered that program. We continue to look forward to a program that we're going to start, that we started many years ago. It's a trigger lock program where residents can come to the Naperville Police Department, receive a trigger lock free of charge, as well as instructions on how to use it. So we're working on that. Our crime incident map that allows residents to see what is happening in their neighborhood is one of our most visited websites in the city of Naperville. So residents can be informed of what crimes are occurring in their neighborhood, whether it's related to gun violence or any type of crime, because we need residents' help. The police department cannot keep our community safe by itself. We have to have that robust partnership with our residents. The best way we can do that is continue to have partnership with our residents and inform them of what is going on in their neighborhood so they can let us know what is happening. Our Lock It or Lose It campaign, we've had that up and operational for the last 3 or 4 years. I wish I could say it was more successful. We are still averaging the majority of our burglaries, residential and motor vehicle, 70% of them are from unlocked cars, unlocked residents. So we continue to advocate residents to lock their vehicle, lock their car. I think everybody knows when we're talking about gun violence, our community is 30 miles from the city of Chicago, which is experiencing the highest number of shootings in the country. And people who live in Cook County, our state's attorney just told me recently that over 50% of the individual he prosecutes for gun violence cases have a Cook County address. So the individuals in that high crime area that have guns, have drugs, have found the western suburbs because guess what? People out here don't lock their cars, don't lock their doors. So we continue to advocate for our residents to lock it or lose it. So those are just some of the programs that we have to actually prevent some of the incidents we're seeing in Naperville.
Chief, how do you, like, Chicago has the highest crime, it's also the most strict on guns.
Right.
So how would, and doing any of this honestly help? Because criminals are gonna do evil no matter what.
Right. So how do you convince a criminal not to commit a violent act, right?
You're not.
You're not. That's right.
The consistent criminal, though, it's a political thing. The state's attorney, they don't care.
All right, we have one more question for Leslie. Leslie, you're a mom with 2 young children. Currently, our schools run active shooter drills as part of their disaster trainings, along with fire and tornado drills. Do you think this is the best way schools can prepare students and staff for this kind of disaster? Are you in favor of arming teachers? Why or why not?
Short answer, no to both. I will elaborate. So let's talk about drills first. So obviously we haven't been doing these drills for too terribly long of a time, so we don't have a ton of data and evidence out there to show us how these are helping. There is definitely no evidence to show that putting these kids through these drills does anything. What we do see, though, is when we survey Gen Z youth, 75% cite mass shootings as a significant source of stress, and 41% report that security measures in schools had done nothing to alleviate their stress. So what these drills are doing is we're just inflicting more trauma on this generation of kids who are already experiencing higher levels of stress than any other generation before them. Having teachers go through drills is obviously important. We need to be prepared. But there's no evidence out there that says just verbally talking through drills is any less effective than putting the kids and teachers through, it's a lot of times around this country, very, very elaborate drills that can really be terrifying to both the students and the teachers. I won't get into that. As far as arming teachers goes, the main thing I want to just say is more guns is not the answer. There's so many organizations who really oppose this. The Major City Police Chiefs Association, for example, the AFT and the NEA, which are the 2 of the largest school teacher associations, both oppose arming teachers. Again, there's no evidence that arming teachers will make schools safer. There just isn't. We really need to focus on prevention. We need to prevent shootings before they happen. And again, that goes back to safe storage. That also goes back to my question about more data and more research. Once we can really identify how and why this is happening, we can absolutely keep our students safer. 78% of targeted school shootings, the weapon came from the shooter's home or the home of a relative where it was unsecure. So that right there is a great way to eliminate school shootings. I'll end there.
And the media sensationalizes it too. With the kids, they're on social media.
All right, I'd like to finish with our final question.
It's all it does. The media. Nobody wants to.
How about that church shooting? A good guy with a gun.
All right, excuse me.
No, wait. No, let's talk. That's why I'm here. I'm here to say something. That's why I'm here. Because the media has a big part. And what these kids are doing on social media, they're sitting there and they're listening to all this stuff. I don't care if I'm a guest. I do.
Okay.
I'm here to voice my opinion. Freedom of speech, excuse me.
This isn't
the news where I get 2 minutes to talk.
Chief, I gave the ground rules, did I not, at the beginning?
I don't care about the ground rules.
Evidently.
So, well, I don't care. You want me to leave? I'll
My
leave.
son and my ex were protected
We're
because
not
they had a
through
gun
with
in the
the
house.
questions
And my
for
That's
friend
not
had
about
one
the
of these.
question. It's
Gentlemen.
about the whole fact of the cause and the effect of everything and
The
what you guys are
purpose of
talking
this
about.
program was
And individual,
educational.
as a group,
Gentlemen,
should learn more about
please.
being American instead of Democrat or Republican, okay? That's
Yes.
not what it's
Hey, you know
about.
what, this group was founded on providing information for people around Naperville.
Hey guys, we'll be
It's
here for
difficult.
questions.
I'll leave so you guys can sit here and listen to this bullshit.
We'll take
That's
your
what it's.
questions.
Chief, I convinced you. The chief of police has a real
Those are the tolerant liberals for you.
because the politicians and such as
Tolerant
yourself
lefties.
don't want to make any effort to try and help these people.
Please, your guest, goodbye.
You leave too. Oh, well, don't worry about it. Makes no sense.
All right, we have one more question.
You're
for
putting
the
pressure
panel.
on the police department over something that you guys haven't
We
controlled.
created, we have 3 panelists, and we're doing just fine without the.
Good, I don't care. Nobody cares. Nobody likes Indivisible anyway. You guys are anti-American.
Everybody else good?
All right, we are going to do some audience questions.
So we had asked if you had questions, because again, we knew this was going to be a topic where we all had a lot of emotion. So if you do have questions, we had asked you to complete the card. So we're going to stick with that to keep some measure of moving forward. Thank you.
All right, so I have a few audience questions here, so I'll start with the first one. By the way, if you write a question, would you add if there's a specific panelist you'd like to answer it, please? This one's for Chief Marshal. What experience does the Naperville Police Department have with Firearms Restraining Order Act passed in 2018? I think you've answered that, but go ahead.
Yeah, this is a relatively new law, and it's called the red flag law. So what we can do, actually it's for really directed at, we already have, for law enforcement, we already have something in place in terms of we can do voluntary or involuntary commitments of individuals who pose a risk to themselves or others. So that's been in place for many, many years. The new red flag law gives citizens the ability to go to the state's attorney's office, and they can articulate that they have a concern for themselves or others with an individual that they know has a firearm. And then that they file a petition with the state's attorney's office, who then goes in front of a judge, and then they can direct law enforcement, and then can go out and seize that firearm.
This next question doesn't have a particular panelist, so is there a, maybe you could answer this, Mr. Ferdinand. Is there a maximum number of firearms law if you have a FOID card? I guess they're asking, is there a maximum, is there a cap on how many firearms you can own?
Firearms can you own in a household?
No, there's no limit. But I should point out, you only have 2 hands, so it's probably the only number you can shoot at a time.
Of people arrested for gun charges in Illinois, what % actually have FOID cards?
I don't know that data offhand, you know, the percentage that I do know. There's quite a few that have revoked FOID cards, and that's something that unfortunately, due to cutback in funding at the state level, the state police used to have a group that would go out. This is about 10 years ago. It was called they had many state police officers who would be more aggressive. When somebody's FOID card was revoked, they would go find that person, go to that person's address, and retrieve those firearms. That group is down to about 3 state police officers right now.
If I may, I posed that question. So I would like to follow that up. Would it be fair to say across the state that more than 50% of people with gun charges were not actually legal to own that gun? Is really what I'm trying to get at.
I think that's a fair estimate based on what we see.
That's really what I was trying to point at, is that most people who commit gun crimes aren't actually legally able to own that gun.
Thank you.
Can a gun only legally have one owner?
Can a gun legally have only one owner?
Like in a house with a husband and a wife? You know,
They would both have to have a FOID card if they're going to possess a firearm. There's no owner assigned for regular type firearms, but everybody must otherwise have to be able to possess a firearm lawfully in order to use it and possess it. Yeah, I think I overheard your explanation. Yeah, only one person can fill out this form to be the transferee of the firearm. Yes.
All right.
Or a legal entity, actually, also. But then an individual has to be assigned from that legal entity to be the transferee.
All right, this is for Leslie. How many gun safety classes or seminars has your group conducted or sponsored?
Thank you for that question. I love that. So, one of the aspects of Moms and Men Action is an educational arm called Be Smart. So what we do is we go around to, let's say, MOPS, which is Moms of Preschool Students, PTAs, homeowners associations, groups like Indivisible, and we have it's about a 20-30 minute presentation where we talk all about safe gun storage, recognizing the signs of suicide, when you have young children like me and they're going to a house to play for the first time, making that ask, which can be incredibly awkward and scary, but it's so important, right? To ask, hey, do you have any guns in the home? And if you do, no big deal. Are they safely secured? Right? So that's one of the big things. I'm having a brain fart. But yes, so we love Be Smart. It's all about safe storage. And yeah, I mean.
All right, to the Chief of Police, can you discuss the impact of the 2005 Warren versus District of Columbia when the Supreme Court said, quote, police have no duty to protect individual citizens? This was asked by Mr. Janka.
I'm not familiar with that ruling at all. Never heard that before.
Can I speak? Okay, yeah. That is a Supreme Court ruling. If you go anywhere online and look up Warren versus the District of Columbia, you can read the case of 4 nurses who had their house broken into. 2 were downstairs, 2 were upstairs. They called the police. The police drove by the condo, said it looked good. They proceeded to rape and beat the girls. They called them again. The 2 who were upstairs hiding. They drove by and did not come into the house. After everything was done, they brought the lawsuit saying, why didn't you protect me? And the Supreme Court said that the police department has no duty to protect specific individuals, which is why I like to have a firearm around, because they won't be there quick enough. You can look it up.
When seconds come,
you want this?
I don't think the councilman would want us to stop for
Let's get us both in trouble.
Yeah. Right, Councilman?
Let's get us both in trouble.
We're still going to respond. If people call 911, we're coming.
No. But if you don't get there in time, the court says, too bad.
We have outstanding response time.
This is 2 questions, but one of them I'm not certain what it's asking. So I'll ask the second question for Mr. Benjamin, or for Benjamin Ferdinand, excuse me. What is the penalty for lying on a background check form? Are you aware of prosecutions in this area?
I think the Chief of Police would probably be better positioned to answer that question. I'm not aware of any specific cases of small dealership. I've been in business that long, so I'll let the Chief answer that.
So that would be under the direction of the state police, and if somebody lied on their background investigation, I'm sure they would be denied the FOID card.
Actually, looking at this firearms transfer record, it says the information you provide will be used to determine whether you're prohibited from receiving a firearm. Certain violations of the Gun Control Act are punishable by up to 10 years imprisonment, up to $250,000 fine.
Thank you. Nearly half of all murders committed by someone using a gun are committed by someone with 1 or more prior gun-related convictions. Why don't we focus more on previous offenders?
That's what I said earlier. I think that's an absolute must in this country, because when we arrest an individual for committing a crime, such as an armed robbery, aggravated assault, the majority of cases I've seen is that they don't have FOID cards. They've illegally possessed the firearm, and they continue to get out of prison earlier than the judge sentences them to. So I think that is the focus that our country and our state must address.
That's fine, if I could follow up. I've sat in on a few panel discussions in Chicago that are kind of similar, and I've heard the Chicago Police voice statistics similar to what...
Sir, if you would stand up and share your, yes.
Sure, thank you, sorry about that. I've sat in on a number of panel discussions on similar topics involving gun violence, and I've heard Chicago Police talk about statistics similar to what you had indicated, which is what they're seeing is having to arrest and rearrest the same offenders over and over and over again for gun-related crimes. And they had voiced the need for legislation or some kind of action that would keep repeat violent offenders in jail. My question really to everyone on the panel is, where's the political dilemma there that is preventing that? Is there somewhere in this gun debate and discussion wherein there are folks that don't believe violent offenders should be kept in jail? Because if they were, you cut the murder rate in half in every major city in America. What is the problem, and why do we keep focusing on all this bureaucracy and red tape and administrative cost and forms that are wholly ignored by criminals and the mentally ill, instead of focusing on keeping criminals behind bars that are clearly violent?
I agree.
So I'll use an example of, you have to have mandatory sentences. So years ago, there was mandatory sentences for drug dealing, which is a mandatory 6 years in prison. That forced the judges, they couldn't get around. So what you're seeing is you have to have mandatory sentences so the judges can't work around it. And I think that's what you need in terms of firearm. If you commit a crime, a violent crime with a firearm, it must be a mandatory sentences so the judges can't reduce the sentences, because that's what's happening. If you look at the statute, if you commit a violent crime, an armed robbery with a gun, there's a minimum and a maximum sentence. How many of those individuals serve at least the minimum? Very few. So you must have mandated sentences. So again, the courts system can't work around it.
I'd like to hear from Mom's command action on that, if I could. I'm curious what your take is on that.
So the question is, why not just keep, so if someone commits a gun crime, why not just keep them locked away for the rest of their lives? No. And that's the answer? No. Just pose the answer, or excuse me, pose the question to me real quick, so I understand what I'm answering.
We are far from talking about keeping people in jail for all their life for one act. What we're seeing in Chicago is people not spending one single day in jail for violent crimes, some of which involving guns. There was an ABC News story that came out that was citing an instance in which they had a man who had been arrested just a week later for his 6th gun-related offense. They're not keeping people in jail, and that's where all the crime is occurring from. Well, where is the dilemma in simply being much firmer with repeat gun offenders than we are now? Clearly that's the issue in Chicago, and it's starting to find its way out here as well.
I don't really know how to answer that question. I don't know that we need criminal justice reform in this country. I will say that, first and foremost. To keep talking ad nauseum about longer prison terms and prison sentences, the examples that you're citing, I'm simply not familiar with. I would very much like to see these the data that you're talking about. I'm not going to talk about Chicago gun crimes right now because we're not in Chicago. We're in Naperville.
It's coming out this way. You better wake up to it.
I will say, ma'am, come on.
You know what? I'll leave too. Is that what you want? Yeah.
What I will say is, here's what I will say. Longer prison sentences absolutely may help. I don't dispute that at all. That is not something that Moms to Men Action supports, because there is no data out there right now to support that. What we are supporting are things like universal background checks, safe storage laws, red flag laws, that data shows us that can make an impact on gun violence in this country.
If I could comment on the question as well. Speaking from personal experience as a police officer in Fairfax County, Virginia, which is a suburb of Washington, D.C., which we all know has had its history of violent crime. In Virginia, when I served out there, they had a 5-year mandatory minimum sentence for, I don't recall if it was felonies or violent felonies committed with a firearm. And I know when I locked somebody up and I charged them with that and went forward with prosecution, they never came back. I never saw them again. So in my personal experience, the mandatory minimum sentences did work. In addition, I agree with some of the sentiments from the folks here that the bad guys aren't going to follow the laws. That's what makes them criminals. So we always have to consider the impositions that we make through legislation and how that affects law-abiding citizens and their rights. All right? Because the laws we're talking about affect a great many people, but are the criminals really going to follow it? Are they going to go out and buy trigger locks for their pistols that they're committing robberies with? Probably not.
Is there a process for any of this FOIA or that where fingerprints are taken? And what I have in mind is the Pratt massacre, the main mass killing. The guy who was the perpetrator in that had a FOIA card. He purchased weapons here in our state, but he had a criminal background in another state. The only reason they knew about later, post-event, about his background was because he had applied for a concealed carry. Then there was a fingerprints taken, and they found this thing that this offense he had abused, that he would not have been allowed to buy a gun in Illinois. But as far as I understand, fingerprints are not done for FOIAs, or even when you buy a gun here in Illinois.
Is that the case?
That's correct. I don't know how often or how frequent that situation actually occurs, because for the most part, when the state police runs your record check, they're double checking against other sources to verify your identity. Fingerprints are very expensive. Fingerprints, because of that cost, it requires people who might not have the means to get their fingerprints. You can't deny them their Second Amendment rights if they can't afford, $150 to get their fingerprints taken. How much good it would do, I don't know. I know the particular case you're talking about. I can't say how widespread that is, whether that's an anomaly or something that happens all the time. That would be a question for state police, who better be able to answer the question about how much fingerprints would assist in that type of situation.
Yeah, I can tell you some of the stores around here are starting to use biometrics to even charge for purchases. You don't even need your credit card in that. So it's handprints. So, I mean, how hard is it to do handprint or fingerprint or something when you buy a car or a gun or get a FOIA card?
I don't know what goes into those systems. I'm not an expert on fingerprint systems, I'm sorry.
But it doesn't cost you when you do it.
I do think it's less than $150, and the reason I say that is just today I went to a TSA pre-check and they fingerprint you to get that approved, and it's $85 to apply for a TSA pre-check just to make traveling a little easier. So there's got to be a less expensive way.
And I'll add too, people that are in financial services, if any person in financial services were to sell you a mutual fund, they have to have a background check, they have to have fingerprints. So it's not that difficult to do, and it's not expensive to do. So something that, we talk about trying to use measures that we can all live with.
Mr. Worley, you're...
Grant Worley, State Representative. We've tried to address this issue in Springfield. And one of the concerns was not only the cost, but another concern was who holds the records and who has access to the records, so if we could come to some understanding of what happens to the state, if the state police owns the records, who has access to them, and who disposes of them and when. So it is being looked at.
Thank you. Do you have a question?
This is a question, yes.
Okay.
And maybe the chief or Leslie, maybe you can answer it. A lot of talks about universal background checks. And correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe some of the people in the audience have the actual data, but so many of these last mass shootings that we've been hearing about, they purchased the gun legally. The background checks did not work. It did not stop the crime. It did not stop the crime. And then the DOJ statistics Didn't they interview a bunch of prisoners and find out that most of them got their guns illegally, either by stealing them or straw purchases? So how effective really are background checks?
In my opinion, if a universal background check saves just one life, it's worth it.
In my personal opinion, if somebody wants to carry a 30-round magazine in their modern sporting rifle and it saves their life, that choice is worth it also.
And if they are a law-abiding citizen who can pass a background check and legally own a gun, then that is absolutely their right.
We're already passing okay, but we hear a lot of talk about banning so-called high-capacity magazines.
I'm not here to talk about banning.
Okay.
Thank you all for your questions. We have one.
No, I'm not, but if you want to talk after, I would love to.
The bad handwriter was this public school educator
I apologize.
So, yeah, he asked that he get, if you want to translate?
Thank you. Yeah, my question was for the chief. I can't sign. It was about after a red flag or a FOID revocation. I wanted to clarify that if your FOID is revoked or you get red flagged, your guns are not the property of the police department or the state of Illinois or the government. Isn't that correct, Chief?
That's right.
So you can dispose of those with a friend or a gun shop or someone else who has a FOID who is legal to own. They are not for the state or the police department to destroy. Is that correct, Chief?
That's right, and we just had a case like that revoked FOID. We took the firearms, there was about 20 of them, in our police department, and we held them. And then what he did is and this is a gap in the system we have to look at.
Right.
But what he did is he sold those guns to another person who had a FOID. That person showed up at the police department, and we returned the weapons to that person that he translated.
Thank you for your clarification.
All right, we have one wrap-up question for the panelists. A recent article by Lisa Marie Payne of the Associated Press and printed in the Naperville Sun on November 27th of 2019, titled "Popular Ghost Guns Don't Leave a Trace," raises a whole new kind of concern for all of us. These are some of the quotes from the article to better explain what ghost guns are and 3D guns available to anyone with internet access. Quote, "For a few $100, tools, and some elbow grease, you can make your own rifle or handgun. It's all perfectly legal, and it can be done without leaving anything behind for the government to trace." End quote. Those ghost guns have long been popular among hobbyists or gun enthusiasts, but gun control advocates say they are increasingly popping up in crimes used by people who are prohibited from buying a firearm and trying to circumvent a background check. Most recently, on November 14th, 2019, a teenager used a homemade handgun to fatally shoot 2 classmates, wound 3, and in the end killed himself. Without going into a great deal of detail, the article lists 3 other recent instances in which the killer could not pass a background check but was able to make his own weapon. If we consider H.R. 8 once again, and 94% of Americans support universal background checks, in light of the ability to make your own weapons, is that bill already too late to be effective? Should it be illegal to make your own weapons?
So people have been making their own weapons for centuries and their own firearms for a couple hundred years at least. The question is, what defines a homemade weapon? What defines a block of steel to a weapon? At some point in the manufacturing process, you're starting with a block of metal, a block of plastic. At some point, the ATF has to decide at what point that becomes a firearm. At what point can that be assembled readily into a usable firearm? So if you're going to outlaw homemade guns, where is that place going to be? And as the question itself asks, we're already talking about people that are making homemade guns for nefarious purposes. They're already intentionally going around background check laws. They already know they're not supposed to have a gun. So why would they follow a law saying they can't make their own if they've already disregarded all the other laws with regard to firearm possession? So I know a number of people have made their own firearms for personal use. I'm not personally aware of anybody that's used one in a crime.
It is already illegal to sell a whole.
That is correct.
Just make sure that, yeah.
Right. You can't sell one. It has to be for personal use. And the ones that I've seen that are made on 3D printers are generally not safe to shoot. Tend to blow up in your hand. The guns can't be made entirely of 3D printed plastic material. There has to be some metal in them. There's got to be a barrel. There's got to be springs for them to work. So the question proposes that it's very easy to do this. It is not. It does require some machining skills. It does require some time and money, and there's considerable risk to the person who's building it that it's not going to blow up in their face.
So our experience in Naperville, I don't know of one case where we've had an individual use a homemade firearm to commit a crime. And I'll just say with the internet, these are challenging times. We deal with cyber crimes in the police department all the time, where individuals are on the dark web learning how to do all kinds of things. How is a background check going to stop an individual from going on the internet to figure out how to build a gun or build a bomb or commit some other cyber crime? That regulation needs to come from the federal government, and I don't know how they're going to do it, how they're going to, require people to behave properly on the internet when they can go on there and YouTube, how to do it about anything. So I don't know how a background check is going to prevent somebody from making their own firearm.
The question of, is it too late for the bill to already be effective? I say no. I mean, that should not stop us from trying to pass universal background checks. There are states, California, New York are examples, who have started pursuing ghost gun bills. So I will be interested in seeing how those bills are worded. Like you said, it's difficult to differentiate. And 3D printers weren't even a thing until like between 5-10 years ago. And like you said, technology is happening very fast. So while the 3D guns, the most of them are very dangerous and plastic and they'll just explode in your hand, how much longer will it be to make it much, much simpler to make these guns? So I would be curious to watch the legislation that may or may not come out of some states on that.
Right, so that wraps up our questions. Yes, you have one more question.
Just tell me what article, it was Lisa Marie Payne, was that the name?
Yes, this article, she's with the Associated Press, and it was printed in the Naperville Sun on November 27th, 2019. She spells her last name P-A-N-E.
P-A-N-E, thank you.
That wraps up, oh.
So here we are at the end of this, and the one thing that Indivisible Naperville knew coming into tonight was this is not an easy discussion. And each and every one of these people on this panel up here, I applaud them for coming here tonight to speak to you and to let you have a discussion. This is more of what we need. We certainly appreciate Mr. Ferdinand coming down, because that it was a long haul for him, because there weren't many gun dealers that are willing to come to something like this and to put this forward. And we thought it was important to show each and every one of these. Our Chief of Police, Marshall, is fabulous here in Naperville, and he's got the background and things like that we need, and it helps to keep us safe here. And so I thank you for coming. And Leslie, it's not ever easy to sit on one of these panels, and I appreciate you being here. And I appreciate everyone that took the time tonight to come here to listen and have a discussion and trying not to get emotional about this type of thing. There are a couple of elected officials that came in after we started our meeting. Representative Grant Worley, thank you for coming tonight. And I want to get this Irishman's names right, so Judge Jim McCluskey over here walked in. And it's a conversation that needs to continue. This is not something that we will decide. This is not something that we will, enforce or move laws tonight, but it's something that if we can keep the discussion going, it's beneficial. So, to wrap up the meeting tonight, there were a couple more candidates who had come in after we started this meeting, and you were here? Oh, you were here. Oh, Barb O'Meara, Library Board candidate. No, I apologize. I was at a Library Board meeting. That's where I've got my little sign on. And I love that we have the lights on down here, by the way. Danica, did you come in after the start of this? Yes. Danica McMillan in the back. Come on up here for a second. We'll give you 17 and a half seconds. You got it? All right. It's 8:35. Tell us what you're running for.
I am running for state rep in District 41. I am a Democrat. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've been doing that for over 20 years. I want to bring a voice that is not heard in this community to this community. I'm a part of what they call New Naperville. And I want to make sure that people are represented, as far as mental health issues, senior issues, and lastly, the environment. That's something that's not necessarily being addressed here in this district, and that's very important to the residents that I've talked to. That is more than probably something. But because I am a social worker, and this was a very tense room, I think that everybody might need to do some meditation. Just take some deep breaths before you leave. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Who? Diane Hewitt, you wanted to, if Bev would have gotten this cord out, it would have been easier.
So voting starts on February 6th. And as some of you know, we have a whole lot of choices for delegate candidates for president. If you're in the 6th district, you have 6 choices. If you're in the 11th district, you have 5 choices. And I think there's 5 in the 14th. But I'm a delegate candidate for Elizabeth Warren. If anybody's interested in her as a candidate, please see me. But she has a lot of fabulous ideas, and I think she's going to be a wonderful president.
All right, so we've got our panel up here. I want to thank everybody that came out tonight, because it does take effort to come out on a January night, even though it's not that bad outside tonight. So if I missed anybody, I apologize, but thank you for coming, and thank you. And our next meeting is going to be February 19th. Let's talk cannabis. It's going to be so much fun. And now that's the night you should come. No, there will not be samples. We cannot say that, no. All right.